Welcome to Phases. In today's episode, we are answering your top questions all about parenting and child development. We're going to be getting into all sorts of topics like neurodivergence, gentle parenting, problem solving with your kids, and a whole lot more.
Mhm.
Let's get into it.
Welcome to Phases, a child development podcast. I'm Dr. Courtney, a clinical and educational psychologist with over 15 years of experience.
And I'm Scott, Courtney's husband and professional podcaster.
We have two little ones of our own, and we know how busy life can get. So we're here to help you navigate every phase of the parenting journey.
Join me in learning from Courtney's expertise in parenting neurodiverse and neurotypical kids in a non-judgmental, fun, and evidence-based way.
We're so glad you're here. Make sure you subscribe and share with any parents in your life.
So welcome to our first Q&A episode. Court, how you doing this morning?
I'm good. I actually have a little story for you before we get into this. Is that okay?
It's a story I'm hearing for the first time.
Yes. Okay. So the other day I was driving somewhere, but we live by like an elementary school, and the kids were outside for recess, and I'm just driving by and I see this girl and she's facing away from the kids and she's in like the butterfly position. And she was meditating,
Oh, wow.
like in the sun, like eyes closed. She looked so peaceful. And I was just thinking like, wow, this is so cool. Like we must be doing something right as like parents. You've got like kids meditating at recess. And she just looked like so calm. I thought it was really neat.
Yeah, I think kids today are wild. Like our daughter loves sushi and
Right?
kids
They're
did
so
child
evolved,
yoga. It's
right?
very wild. Yeah, I cannot imagine that
I
being
know. I was like, I want to like channel this girl. Like
Yeah.
I wish I was doing that at recess. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, it's easy when you're a kid, right?
Yeah.
So the way this is going to work is that you submitted your questions to our questions form over at phases.fm. There's a link in the bottom. It says questions. And if you have any questions that you want to have answered on the show, we will read them anonymously on this, unless you want, of course, your name for some reason, but we will read them anonymously and answer your questions. That way we can really dive into some topics that maybe Courtney and I aren't thinking about that you're thinking about. So
Mhm.
this first one here is, hi, Dr. Courtney, big fan of the podcast. I'm looking for advice on how to talk to my 9-year-old daughter about possible neurodivergence. She's always been a bit different in how she thinks and processes things. She's doing well in school, but it takes a lot out of her. And she tends to hold it together all day and then fall apart at home. She's been seeing a psychoeducator, and we have an evaluation coming up soon for possible autism or giftedness. She doesn't know about the evaluation yet, but she's very curious about understanding herself better. I guess my question is, how do we talk to her about potential diagnosis in a way that helps her feel understood without making her feel labeled or different? Especially since her only reference for autism right now is more of stereotypical presentations.
Mhm.
And as a side note, I suspect I might have an undiagnosed ADHD myself. So I'm wondering if sharing could be helpful too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think obviously this is a great question, and kudos to you for going out there and getting the psychoeducational eval. That's a really big step. I always remember parents calling and they're ready for it, but there's so much anxiety that comes with it. Actually, we just talked about that in our episode on what to do if you
Anxiety,
suspect
yeah.
your child has learning disability. But anyway,
Oh, I
kudos to
thought you
you.
meant the anxiety episode.
Oh yeah, no, it's just getting that process started.
Yeah.
Because some parents may suspect that there's neurodivergence, but with autism, it is still like fairly stigmatized, in the world. It's one of the harder diagnoses to hear about.
Yeah.
So anyway, kudos to you. But what my advice to you here would be is to celebrate strengths and challenges. So to talk about it in that way, because the best thing about being human is that everybody has strengths and challenges. And so for your daughter, even if she is on the autism spectrum, she'll still have her own unique set of strengths and challenges, that she has. And so talking about it in that way can kind of help break down that construct of it being a negative thing, but that maybe some of her challenges fit with what we know is the autism spectrum, right? Which is challenges with social communication and then having like restricted or repetitive interests and behaviors that get in the way of everyday functioning
Mm,
and like social functioning. So, talking to your daughter about what are your strengths? Let's talk about that. Are you curious? Do you like to do deep dives on things? Do you have like really vast knowledge in the areas that you're interested in?
mm,
And usually for girls, those are their social and emotional strengths.
mhm.
And then, what are some of your challenges? And you might say like, well, some of my challenges are that I have a hard time with planning if you have ADHD, right? I'm just going off of that.
Yeah.
Or, I have difficulties getting started on things. So bringing yourself in those ways, I think could be really helpful. But talk to your daughter about what her challenges are and how they may fit, once you get that confirmation of a diagnosis with what we know about as the autism spectrum. And understanding too that autism, it is a spectrum, right? We do have this sort of stereotype of what we think about, but for girls it is so oftentimes it is so different than the stereotype that we know,
Yeah.
which tends to be more like boy depicted. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah.
Boys have more of that like rigidity and the difficulties socially, whereas girls tend to mask a little bit better
I was gonna say,
socially.
you told me before that it's
Yeah.
it's harder sometimes for people to recognize in
Yes, right.
girls.
Because
Yeah.
girls, they work really hard and like socially, just generally speaking, girls are trained to be more social
Mhm.
and to blend in socially with peers.
Yeah.
And then they come home and they just kind of melt down because they've held it all together for so long. And then when they're at home, they just fall apart because they can't hold it together anymore. So it is harder to diagnose girls on the spectrum, just generally speaking.
Mm.
But aside from strengths and challenges, I think that labels can be really helpful because, especially for gifted kids, because often they know that something is different about them, but they don't have the context, or that label is essentially what that context is providing for them to figure out why.
Mm.
So instead, kids often internalize it, and then we see like escalated anxiety, depression, low self confidence. I see that as kids get older, they don't have those supports in that context. Or they think like, oh, I'm just not as smart as the other kids. So it gets internalized in some way if we're not talking about it directly,
Okay.
because like I said, the kids just figure it out.
Yeah.
So labels can be so helpful in that way. And it also helps other people too, like parents, therapists, educators to understand, this child is neurodiverse, they have autism, this is what it looks like for them, and these are the supports that they need, aside from giving them access to other things like community resources and supports.
Yeah.
You need that label too for that, but anyway, the label can just be so helpful. So I think talking about the label, if you have it, is helpful. Talking about the strengths and challenges that they have and how everyone has them, and then use yourself as a model. Talk about that in your own journey, and I think kids relate to that really well.
Yeah. I've noticed that too. We've talked about this a little bit, but our son and I sharing the ADHD is able in a way that we were able to talk about in a way that's like really honest, like the strengths and challenges of it. And to me, that does like the fact that we can talk about it so clearly. I do think that helps quite a bit for both of us.
Yeah.
And me personally, I I know that like labels, it's so funny because when you talk about things sometimes your idea of like labels being helpful, like I feel like the perception of labels, and this could just be my own bias, but like the perception of labels is kind of negative, right? Like don't label me, or this type of thing where it's
Yeah.
like uh seeing it from your perspective where like the strengths of having that label I think is really interesting to me.
I can tell you more often than not, like 99 times out of 100, the label is so transformative for kids, especially teens, because they really, A lot of teens think, I'm going through this alone or nobody else has these same struggles and everything's kind of about them, right? They're more egocentric in those ways and that's developmentally appropriate, but we need to be having those conversations with teens so they can find their community and understand like, no, I'm not so different, I'm not so unique.
Yeah.
Other people have these same struggles too and it makes such a world of difference in terms of their confidence and their self-esteem.
Yeah. I love that.
One thing I do want to point you to is Liz Angoff. She is a psychologist and she has a great website called Explaining Brains. And for anyone who wants resources on how to talk to your child about their neurodiversity or their diagnosis, as far as learning, she has a really great website. So explainingbrains.com is a good one. She has a lot of resources for parents that you can talk to your child and use them to help guide that conversation, which can be really tricky and difficult. And then also, of course, understood.org.
Cool. I love that. All right, next one here. Dear Courtney, what are some effective ways that I can step in and help resolve conflict, either between my child and a friend or between two friends at my house, without taking sides or making the situation worse? And how can I encourage them to open up honestly about what really happened, as I'm not always able to witness what went down?
Yeah, so this is a tricky one, right? You can even think about this one as not just like two friends or your child and a friend, but also siblings too,
Yeah.
right? Because as a parent, you don't want to be swayed to one person or the other. You want to be fair and neutral,
This happened. This
but
happened.
that's
Yeah.
really
You
hard.
could always have the one child who's really good at, like,
Selling their
selling their story.
story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Right. Or the one that's like usually at fault. You don't want to
Oh, yes, you don't want
just
the
assume it's
assumption.
that
Yeah.
one. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this situation, the best thing that you can do is to try to be like a coach or to look at yourself that way and stay really neutral and
Mm,
help the kids problem solve it independently. But that's easier said than done. Right. So the first thing you want to do, of course, is try to de-escalate the situation and regulate the kids so that they can again borrow your calm.
mm.
And so you might say, okay, I wasn't there. I didn't see what happened. So I want to hear from each of you what your side of the story is. Okay, so you go first,
Yeah.
and the other person try to encourage them to be quiet, or we're gonna take turns. When he's finished talking, this other person can talk, right? You can talk. So have them sell their story or tell their story. And from that, you want to encourage them to come up with a solution. So it's best to do that by reflecting what you heard. So give me like a scenario. You have a
Uh,
good one?
yes. Okay, so, the kids were playing basketball, and one kid keeps taking all the shots, and the other kid is feeling like they don't get a chance to have a shot with the basketball. The other child is being
Okay,
selfish.
so someone's hogging the ball.
Hogging the ball, that's the best way to say that. Yes, we got a ball hog.
Okay. So you might say, "Okay, Timmy, so it sounds like
Timmy, yes.
you're really great at basketball and you wanted to show off all of your cool moves." And that's what I'm hearing from you. From you, Tommy, what I'm hearing is that you want to have a turn with the ball and you're not getting
Mm.
a fair share. Right? I wonder what we could do about that. Or you could say, how do we think we could make this fair for everyone so that we all get a turn?
So
So just
yeah.
pose a reflective question
So
that
is
you
that
don't have to answer.
is that, like, strategy of having them solve the problem themselves, is that, like, effective? That's, like, the effective way to handle, because then it's not, like, coming down as an edict, is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's part of it, but also, we're building in skills of problem solving, of perspective taking, of being empathetic towards our friends. And the best way to do that is to allow them to come up with the solution themselves
Mm,
rather than to say, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." And sometimes like if the situation is totally like off the rails, kids are fighting, hitting each other, getting physical, you may need to do that, right? You
mm.
may need to separate them and step in. But most of the time, you can be this impartial coach and just pose a reflective question and see what they come up with. Because usually the kids can kind of, once they've calmed down, they can figure out something that will work for them and then move on.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It's so funny, those are the types of situations as a parent, I feel like I don't always feel like I have the right way of like, I don't have a strategy there for dealing with that type of conflict.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
just like with anything, right? When we talk about feelings validation, you don't have to solve the problem, but it is helpful to reflect it back. So again, they can see what's going on from the other child's perspective and pull themselves away from how they're feeling so that they can calmly come up with a mutual solution together.
Yeah.
And it is important, of course, to hold boundaries. So if someone's hitting or name calling, you might set that boundary for them because, they're doing it. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the boundary's not there, perhaps. And if it's a friend too, all households are different, in terms of expectations. So you might say, in our house,
Mm,
we, keep our hands to ourselves and we speak respectfully to one another,
mhm.
right? So framing it in terms of what you do instead of we don't hit and we don't name call, you might do it in that positive language that we talked about, which can be so effective to give kids exactly what we expect. But setting that boundary can be helpful too.
I think, one of the most helpful things you've told me on this show so far was, always telling them what you want to see,
Yeah.
not what you don't want to see, and I think about that every single time I give, feedback to our kids now. Is like, I do think that is effective to give them that, like, but also, like, I wanna think as, like, a child. I remember being at parent or other kids' houses and hearing those types of language, like, this is how we do this in our house or something like that. And I remember as a kid I would be like, oh yeah, okay, the rules are
Right.
different here.
Yeah,
Yes.
usually kids will respect that if you put it out there, but again, all households are different. You can't assume what you do at your household is what they do at theirs.
Yeah.
So it's helpful to set that, but essentially again, just remember you want to be the coach, help encourage them to problem solve rather than fixing it for them,
Mhm.
and again, set structure in place if you need to.
Cool. All right, next one here. Some days our son, who's 3, is exceptionally annoyed and whiny. Everything is a battle, even the things he loves. This leads to tantrums over absolutely everything, and then we end up being grumpy and short with him, and we regret it. Can we do anything early to shift the vibe before it gets out of hand? This one
Yeah.
feels familiar in general. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
A few years ago,
Yeah.
blast from the
A
past.
few days ago. Who knows? Yeah.
Few days ago. Yeah, right. So you remember those preschool days where, kids just anything can trigger them,
Hmm.
and it's not necessarily logical. Sometimes it's predictable, sometimes it's not, and they can't articulate what's going on in their brains,
Mhm.
and on top of that, their emotions and their self-control are just kind of all over the place. They're still developing. Right. So these are hard years and you just kind of have to like be along for the ride. But what I will say is the first thing I would do in this situation is just to check for the basics,
Mm.
right? Are they hungry? Are they tired? Are they overstimulated?
Mhm.
Am I missing any?
No, these work,
Yeah.
for your spouse as well, I
Right.
suppose, yes.
Yes, me here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you check for the basics because I feel like 90% of the time the answer is in one of those.
Okay.
Right. And then you can deal with that accordingly. Right. But if it's not any of those things and they're just having a hard time, then again, it's helpful to remind yourself as a parent that my child is having a hard time. They're not trying to give me a
Mm.
hard time because that helps with that perspective taking because it's so easy to get roped into their storm, their emotional storm, and to lose your cool, especially when it happens like every 2 minutes. Do you remember those days?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where the meltdown's going on for 30 minutes.
And
Our son will
you
be
get very exhausted from that,
yeah,
yes.
right. They're just on the floor crying, and it's exhausting, and you can't calm them down, and you want to, but there's nothing you can do,
Mhm.
right? So you do in those moments, you have to ride the storm with them. And again, that's hard, but you want to make sure your child's in a safe place if they're having a meltdown. They're not like hitting their head or, doing anything to hurt themselves and ride that wave with them of the feelings.
Yeah.
However long that takes, usually it's a couple minutes, but sometimes it does go longer. And for some kids it is more intense than others, but it is helpful. And what you can say is, "Oh, hey, bud, I see you're having a really hard time. It sounds like you're really upset about your stuffy getting wet or whatever it is.
Mm,
Reflect that back to them. I you know i would feel really sad too, or it looks like you're really sad. So connect that feeling, reflect it back to them. And sometimes, again, just giving them that context can de-escalate them, but sometimes it doesn't,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The other thing I will say too is it is really helpful because kids at that age really have no control over a lot of what's happening, and they so want that independence, but a lot of times they don't get that independence
Mm,
because everything has to be done for them. They're
mhm.
like, starting to build those skills, but they're still pretty helpless. They need you for a lot of things. So I do love to give kids a sense of control as much as possible at that age. And it's best to give them, like two things that you would be okay with, right? So if they want to wear a certain outfit in the morning, you might say, okay, we've got two choices today. You can wear this one or this one. Which one would you like? Or, okay, let's get your juice. Which cup do you want? The red one
Mm.
or the blue
So you're
one?
giving them control
You're
when
giving
they
them a
feel like
choice.
they don't have control.
Right, but you're kind of, like, providing structure around that choice, so
Yes.
it's not like they're wearing a snowsuit when it's 90 degrees outside,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
so they have that control, and sometimes, a lot of the battles can be about just, like, independence seeking,
Mm.
so that is a good way to handle that. But again, just remember, kids borrow your calm, and it is best to try to stay calm and just be there for them in those moments. Rub their back or sit with them, listen to calming music,
Mhm.
whatever it is, but help them ride that wave and don't try to work through it if they're in the height of a meltdown because you really just can't reason with them at that point.
Would you say being like, "Oh, sounds like you're tired. Sounds like we need a little bit of a" you would say that's ineffective? That seems to never work.
Oh, well, when you say it that way, that sounds really like
Nah, I'm not saying yeah. I'm not
judgmental.
saying it like that. I'm just saying like, uh, I guess when I'm making a little bit of a joke when I say that, but
Yeah.
like, eh, when you do kind of be like, "Are you feeling tired?" or anything like that, that like never seems to go over well.
Mm. I like to pose it as a question, like, I wonder if you're feeling tired. And they might say,
No.
no. And that's fine. Maybe you ease them into the room if you really think that is how they're feeling
Yeah.
and get them ready for bed. I also used to love, this is a good trick, to have their stuffy. Like our daughter has this beloved bunny,
Mhm.
and you would use the bunny and the bunny would talk for you. So sometimes the bunny would talk in my ear and I would say, "Oh, Bunny is wondering if you're feeling tired." And sometimes that gets them to laugh and it de-escalates them, or the bunny can talk to them.
Mm.
But use all your tricks, lean into that playfulness and the silliness with kids when it's appropriate. Again, if they're mid meltdown, maybe not appropriate,
Yeah.
but your kid,
Yeah.
but lean into all of those tricks. And again, just know at the end of the day, like some days are just rough and you just kind of have to ride the wave. And now, I look back and I miss those days. Maybe not the
Mm.
days of heightened meltdowns, but I miss like the sweet, innocent parts that come with that preschool age too. So
Oh, yeah.
just know it gets better as they get older. And you have to be along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah.
But yes, it is one of those challenges, especially um, like you said, like the getting annoyed and those types of things when it's just like such a lot of emotion behind so many things that I think about every single time on this show that you've talked about not rising to their level or not meeting them at their level and like trying to be that calm in the storm. Those are like the hardest things to do, but I think they're so valuable.
They're so hard.
They're so
Yeah.
hard, so valuable, which, again, we give you a lot on this show, so don't feel like you're doing a bad job if you're not implementing all of these things. Like, take a thing here and there, re-listen, listen and come back again a month later and be like, "Oh, there's, more things that I can,
Mhm.
take and apply from this."
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, the next question here. How do I know if I need to medicate my child for ADHD? Will the teachers even know if I medicate them?
Yeah. So this can be a tricky one. I
Yes.
think just because you have ADHD, it certainly doesn't mean you need medication, before a lot of kids, especially school-aged kids and middle schoolers, can be really effective.
Mm,
So, usually I like to see as a psychologist like 1 to 2 full years of full day school, so like kindergarten, 1st grade. Typically we're not medicating kids until they're about 7.
mm.
7 to 8 is like that sweet spot. Some kids, of course, that have more extreme behaviors, maybe you're looking at like 6,
Okay.
age 6 that you're medicating, but generally speaking, we don't wanna do it too soon. We wanna make sure, like, this is really what it is, and we've given the child time to, adapt to the school expectations and to develop, right? And to
Okay.
make sure that it really is ADHD. So signs you might look out for are, of course, the teacher, right? The
Mhm.
teacher might a lot of schools can't directly say that they think your child needs to be medicated. It's not like a typical practice. I'll
Okay.
just say that
Yeah.
in the schools. So they might allude to it. Some schools might talk directly, but they might allude to it and say, your child's having a really hard time paying attention at school.
Okay.
We're trying all these different things and they're still really struggling. We wanted to have this meeting with you and we wonder like what else could be done. And that's probably a nudge to you that like maybe you should consider medication, especially if you already have a diagnosis, or maybe you should go down that path of
Okay.
exploring, do they have ADHD and should we look at medication?
Okay.
So that's one sign you might consider that. Another would be if your child is coming to you and they're more insightful and they might say, "Mom, I'm having a really hard time paying attention at school. My brain's just going 1,000 miles an hour. I'm distracted and I can't focus." And if you're seeing that not just at school, but in other things too, like at the soccer practice
Mm.
or, at birthday parties or things like that, that might be a sign,
Okay.
right, that your child needs to be medicated. For us, we knew our son probably had ADHD because we had such a strong family history of it, and I was just really waiting for the teachers to come and let us know,
Yeah.
that it was affecting him at school, and then it was my cue that we needed to start exploring that, and
Mhm.
it's made such a difference for
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, which is so funny because I do feel like there's such a massive negative stigma around,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
medicating kids. And as somebody who grew up with ADHD and didn't know that for so long and became like got on a medication later in life, like what? How old was I? Like 38 or something when I
Mhm.
first got on
Yeah.
ADHD meds.
Mhm.
And the thing that surprised me the most about them was I know I'm not a child, but they're not as intense as I was expecting. From what I'd always heard, I always heard that they were like really intense or like they're crazy. But for me, what it did is it allowed me to it allowed me to actually complete tasks and actually
Yeah.
make a to-do list and stick to it and actually get through things instead of having 18 different tasks that I'm doing at once, which was effective for me because my energy was high enough that I could be working on all these things and still be productive, but my completion rate was low. My like depth on some things was low because I wasn't able to go as deep on them. Uh, and what it didn't do is like from what I heard growing up as a kid, like there was a lot of fear around these types of medications, like changing
Yeah.
your personality. And I think maybe the wrong medication could.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I've tried 2 different ones, and I like one more than the other, and the one that I'm on now doesn't change my personality, like, at all, really.
Yeah.
It can increase sometimes my stress levels. It can make me feel a little bit more, um,
Irritable?
I would say not irritable.
Oh,
Yeah, that was
really?
actually a surprising thing because even though my stress levels or those types of things can get higher, I have a greater capacity to focus on an issue and solve it rather than feeling overwhelmed and then in turn irritable. Like if there's too much going on and I'm focusing on too many different things, I'm way more likely to get irritable than I am if I'm like able to be like, here's my context. Okay, now here's my context. Here's where I'm focused on here.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, and as far as medication goes, it is definitely a trial and error process, and some people do have kind of horror stories about it, and I don't want to like dissuade anybody from trying medication, but it is important to know that it is that trial and error process, and sometimes it can take months or, maybe even a year to
Yeah.
dial it in and figure out which type of medication is best for your child, as well as, the dose and things like that. So you have to work closely with a pediatrician to figure that out. And again, understand that if one doesn't work, it doesn't mean that none will work. It just means that that one specifically didn't work. And there's a lot of cool things you can do now, like, and this is maybe whole different podcast again, but you can do like
Mm,
genetic testing and dial that in a little bit quicker as far as what might work for your child. But the other piece of this question that I did want to answer is, will my teacher even know, my child's teacher?
mm.
And the answer is yes,
Yeah.
they will know. If you have a good medication and your child is seeing effectiveness with it, then it will be immediately obvious to the child's teacher. And I've heard that story hundreds of times from
Mm,
teachers. They always know. But, conversely, if your child is having some side effects, we want to know about that as parents. And usually the main hours where that stimulant is working is during the school day. So
yeah.
you don't see that at home. You may see like the come down effects from it, but you're not going to see it in its full effect. So if there is something that is a negative side effect like irritability or loss of personality, or they're not eating, or they look lethargic, those are common things we might see. You want to know about that. And so you want to work in partnership with your child's teacher and not like test them and say like, well, I'm going to try this and we'll see if they know.
Mm.
If you're going to try it, you want to work together,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny to me as a topic of conversation because my outlook on this I think is very different from when I started medication to maybe before I'd even considered starting medication
Yeah.
because it felt scary. It felt like that's a big heavy decision.
Right. When
Um,
we're talking about like your 7-year-old or 8-year-old
right.
kid, they're so little,
They're so
you
little.
do worry. And of course, I had those same thoughts too, even though I know there's so much positive research about when kids are not medicated, that there are negative side effects to that too,
Mm,
that are maybe even more significant than medicating your child, so there's both sides of the story if you're really looking. But the side that we tend to hear about just in the media is all the negative effects with
right.
medication.
Yeah, yeah. So I know it's weird. It's like to think that like the narrative can often be like they're medicating our kids, you
Yeah,
know?
right,
Yeah.
right. But again, obviously your choice, but those are things to look out for and things to consider if you're going to go down that journey.
Yeah, I love how you're framing this as being like this is a personal decision no matter what. It's no judgment whether you
Yeah.
choose to or not choose to. And I think that's really great because I think the narrative is like the people who are making these determinations are pushing medications on us. And maybe there's some people who are, but like I love this being framed as like educate yourself on the pros and cons
Yeah.
because there are pros and cons.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
Okay, cool. So the next one. I know there are some of us who have leaned into a more gentle parenting approach over the last few years, choosing empathy, understanding, and boundaries over punishment or force. In your professional opinion, what would be some downfalls or downsides of this parenting style as it relates to our children becoming independent adults? And or how they will embrace authority in their later life.
Yeah. So I think this is a topic of conversation that's becoming, more and more prevalent as so many of us have assumed this gentle parenting approach. And I don't know if we've talked a lot about gentle parenting here, but essentially what it's promoting is that feelings validation
Yeah.
for your kids, as well as holding a boundary.
Okay.
So there's those two things that are there, right? So you're not letting your child just get away with anything, right? You
Yeah.
have boundaries and structure in your home, but you're also acknowledging their feelings, giving them more like independence and promoting their communication in your conversation rather than saying like, well, I'm the parent, this is how it's done, and your feelings don't matter so much because this is how we're doing it.
Okay.
Also, I'm the parent, and if I mess up, I'm not going to talk about it with you. Like, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Right. Which a lot of us were parented that way. So this gentle parenting approach is more of like a collaborative approach with your child, which I love. I am an advocate
You are.
for that. Yes.
Okay.
But, the way that we learn about parenting in psychology, right? And when we're in school as a psychologist, you learn about the different types of attachment styles. And I like that approach a little bit better than thinking about it as like gentle parenting.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the best way, and this is what psychologists have known for decades, I'm talking like the 50s,
Really? Okay. So
and above.
this isn't just vibes.
No,
Yeah. Okay.
no. What is the best approach for parenting is authoritative parenting, right? And those are parents who are warm and empathetic, but they also provide structure.
Okay.
Right? So there's that balance of both.
When I hear the word authoritative parenting, I don't think warm and
I know, I
yeah.
think it needs better PR.
Yeah, better marketing.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we always thought about the IVE is very excellent. So that's how I think about it as my
Okay.
like little hack. But so that is an authoritative parent. Now, authoritarian parenting,
Authoritarian.
yeah, that
Yes,
is
okay.
like hardcore. I'm going to use punishment. We're going to have too much structure. The child really gets no say.
Mm.
And I'm not warm or empathetic at all. It is just about like hardcore follow what I say.
Okay.
So that's the one extreme,
Okay.
right? The other extreme is more permissive parenting, and that's like you remember Mean Girls and like Amy Poehler as the
Oh, I'm a
mom.
cool mom.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I love that movie. So that's a permissive parent, and if you're not familiar with that, it's just a parent who's essentially like letting the child do whatever they want.
Mhm.
There's no rules, isn't that what she says? There's no rules here.
Yeah, something yeah,
She
yeah,
says something like
yeah,
that.
she says something like that. Yes, I'm the
We
cool
don't have
one.
rules. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a permissive parent. And I think that gentle parenting has kind of swung that way a little bit for many,
Okay.
where it's,
That's where I think about it. Yeah, when I hear the
yeah,
word. Yeah.
right. It's encouraging kids to, talk about their feelings. And, we're afraid as parents, if you're thinking that way, to step in because we don't want to like damage our kids.
Mm,
Right. But kids, the best kids, they need to be validated. They need to be a collaborative part of your family, right? We need to include their input and their say, but you also need to give them structure. Kids need structure and boundaries to know what to expect.
okay.
That helps them set the limits to understand and respect authority, right? Which we want. We don't want them to be afraid of it, but we want them to respect it and to understand like where their place is in the
Mm,
world.
mhm.
Right. And so the best type of gentle parenting is that more authoritative parenting where you're holding a boundary. I know you're really upset that you don't get to go to the mall today, but today we have things that we are doing.
Mm,
We will do that next week. That is a boundary and I'm holding it.
okay.
I know you really want candy after dinner, but that's something we only do on Thursdays. Let's find
Uh-huh.
something else that we can do instead. So that's again, it's holding the boundary. It's acknowledging your child's feeling, but it's saying, no, we have structure and rules here,
Right.
and I'm in charge, right?
Yeah,
I am
right,
the parent,
right.
and this is what we do here. But I will acknowledge what you say, and maybe we could find a compromise somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think that's so good to hear in that kind of way because I think that clears up a lot of the misconceptions I would have about
Okay.
gentle parenting. Because when I hear the word gentle parenting, I do think permissive parenting
Really? Okay.
because I don't know the term. I don't know anything about like the details of that, but just the name gentle parenting feels permissive.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it has been marketed in such a way where it is leaning that way.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, authoritative parenting, like I would have considered my parents to be more authoritative parents, but I was punished. I think most of us were,
Yes.
right? Like, and sometimes it was spanking, but most of the time it was spending time in your room, right? And gentle parenting does not subscribe to punishment.
Okay.
And I think
Does
that
not
that
subscribe to punishment.
no.
Okay.
And I think that is good. I'm on
Okay.
board with that, because punishment does not teach skills. Like,
Okay.
I never sat in my room and thought, what could I do differently next time?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or I should, maybe you feel bad and you feel shame when you're punished, but it
Yeah.
doesn't teach the skills of what should I do.
Yeah, you're right. It's so funny because I think the people who would push back on like that aspect of things and being like, we need punishment, their kids are probably just afraid of them. They haven't learned
Yeah.
anything. They're
Right.
just in those types of kids. Then what? They lash out or they push back
They're
in
going
a
to go to extremes. They're going to lash out and push back, right? Which we don't want those types of adults anyway,
yes. We
right?
got a lot of those types of adults. Yeah.
You don't, because right, you wanna stand up for yourself, but you don't want to do it in an inappropriate way, obviously. And then the other type of adult is more of like a people-pleasing, anxious adult,
Okay.
right, who's afraid.
Yeah.
And so you don't want either of those extremes. And again, punishment does not build skills. So that doesn't mean that you don't talk to your child about what happened, and in gentle parenting, you do,
Yeah.
right? So you validate their feelings, and when they've calmed down, you have a conversation about what happened and what they did that led to this situation, and
Hmm.
what could they have done differently, or next time what could they do differently. And so you're
Yeah.
teaching those skills. You might say, in this house we don't hit, we use calm hands, right?
Yeah.
Even doing it that way is fine, but they don't need to go sit in timeout because they've hit their sister one time or something
Yeah.
like that. So I think if you are an authoritative parent, you're subscribing to gentle parenting and you're using both of those pieces. So, feelings validation, but also holding boundaries and structure,
Yeah.
then those lead to the best adults, right?
Okay.
These are adults who are secure, who have emotion regulation skills, who can communicate, and who understand where the limits are, and how to handle something when they're frustrated.
Yeah. You know what is so funny? I feel like sometimes we lose track of, maybe not me, but like sometimes parents lose track of, we are in the business here of raising people to be good adults.
Yeah.
And
Right.
we are not in the practice of just like, you will listen to what I say, you will do this, you will, it's not like about keeping your household exactly how this like tight uh
Machine.
machine of no freedom or flexibility. It's about what are the choices that we're making that will actually turn these kids into wonderful, excellent, successful adults. And
Right.
and yeah, being that aggressive force towards them probably won't do that.
No, again, it ends up being one of the other extremes,
Right.
right? So that is my advice, and I think those will lead to the best.
Wow, Court, that opened my eyes to a lot of stuff. All right, next one here. How do you assess allowing your children through transition to pursue their dream, like acting, art, or sports, while being realistic about their future job career, knowing that people are rarely successful in those careers? I want to
Yeah.
say about people who are rarely successful in those careers. I'm a fine arts major, folks. I got a fine arts degree. I went to the School of Music, and guess what? I became a computer programmer.
Right, it's all about the pivot, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So I actually have a couple personal stories to this. So as a really young psychologist, I had a client who was like a 10-year-old girl and she wanted to be a professional ballerina.
Okay.
And I danced. So I had some context there, but this child was anxious. She probably had ADHD looking back as well. But I remember just feeling like, oh, I don't want her to like set herself up for failure or, have too high of expectations. So I'm going to bring her back down to earth.
Mm,
And that was the wrong call, and I still think about that today.
really?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and I had a nice honest conversation with her about it, but I could just see like the hope and the dreams just like deflate from her.
That stinks.
And
Yeah.
after that, I knew like that was not the right call. And I was a young therapist, you learn from your mistakes, but I really learned a lot in that moment. And I will say another situation that is similar but more personal is, going to college, I wanted to be a pediatrician. That
Yes.
was my dream, to be an MD. and work with kids. And I was in my first meeting with the school counselor, who those counselors, in college have probably seen what, hundreds of thousands of kids,
Yeah.
if they've been there a long time. And she looked at my transcripts and my scores on the testing and she was like, this isn't going to work for you.
Mhm.
You're not going to cut it here in the pre med classes. And I was so offended. I was like, well, I'll show her,
Okay.
and of course she was right. Like
Yeah.
that didn't happen for me. I do not have a math and science brain, but her telling me that did not help.
Okay.
So I've seen it on both sides of the
Okay.
spectrum where I've
Yeah.
been the deliverer and I've been the recipient, and it is not helpful either way. I think that, kids need to learn for themselves that this dream isn't going to work out. But as a parent, I understand how hard that is to watch your child like aspire to something that is just so unlikely probably,
Mm.
and to watch them fail or to watch them, try to get that dream and it just not happen for them and to deal with the heartbreak. That is so hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't I'm trying to think about because as somebody who went to the School of Music, I don't know if I ever was of the pretense that I would make it in the music industry. My program, to be clear, was like more media arts based. I'm doing audio recording and video editing and all kinds of stuff. So for me, it was never like I'm gonna make it in the music industry. But I was around a lot of kids in music school who were like that. And I will
Yeah.
tell you, the cream rose to the top. Just about
Yeah.
every single person I knew who was like really, really down to pursue in that kind of way and actually had real talent and kept going, they made it in the industry in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
So
So of course it does happen, but if we're talking about like sports, maybe it's even harder in sports. I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know the stats on that,
Oh,
but
I think it's crazy. Yeah.
yeah, right. So I think my best advice would be to encourage them to pursue those dreams, but to also help them be realistic, especially if they're a teenager and you can have more of those honest conversations if they're really thinking about it
Mhm.
and talk about, what is the reality or what are the stats like for people who do make it, what percentage, and then how can we come up with a plan B or like a parallel plan that still allows them to pursue their passions or
Mhm.
their natural talents and interests, but it is maybe more rooted in practicality,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So having both and allowing your child to go through that journey, trying not to like rain on their parade or be negative, but be realistic, right? And still give them that support. So having that balance there, I think is probably the best move.
Okay. Cool. I love that. That's a tough one for me, personally, because yeah, I was, I when I said I wanted to get a fine arts degree, I don't think my parents were ever like, no, don't do that. But also, I didn't get into the school of LS&A at University of Michigan. I only got into the School of Music. So I think my parents could reasonably look at that and be like, well, you're either going to the University of Michigan or you're not. So take the fine arts degree. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, right. But I do think, if you're hardcore, like, no, this isn't going to happen for you. You must be, an engineer or an electrician or something like
Mhm.
that. Like, I do think that builds resentment in kids,
Yeah, I'm sure it
and
does.
they're going
Yeah.
to push back. They won't trust you. And you don't want that,
Yeah.
right? Even if you know in your heart that that's probably the reality.
Mhm.
So you want to do your best to let your child go through that journey and figure it out for themselves as much as possible, but also be realistic with them and have a plan B that they're on board with in case that doesn't happen.
How do you let them go through that journey, or like how do you let them make those discoveries before it's like too late? I guess that's before they're like 30 years old and not and
Yeah,
still trying to pursue something that is never going to happen.
I know. Well, maybe there's a limit that you agree on. We'll keep trying this until you reach this point or this age. I mean, it's probably context dependent on what we're talking about here. But I,
Mhm.
I do think, insightful kids will be able to look around and figure out, I'm not as good as these players,
Mm.
or I don't have the work ethic to put in, to make this dream happen for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do. I think that's a tricky situation. So what I would say to that is maybe have something that you agree upon if you're funding it,
Mm,
if it's coming from something that you are giving the child like money or time or, whatever it is. If it's themselves, and they're 30, they
yeah.
probably need to figure that out for
Yeah.
themselves,
You're
and,
right.
and you
Yeah.
just support them as much as possible. But I think it's okay to have some structure around a dream.
It's probably easier with dreams that have like concrete cutoffs. You either made the team or you
Oh
didn't.
yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Or like, I just think about the arts where you're just
Yeah, the
like,
arts
I
is
can
more
make it.
fun. Yeah,
I'm going to be
yeah,
a DJ. I'm going to
yeah.
be the best DJ. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
maybe at some point you have to be realistic with them. Like if you want to continue down this journey on your own, that's fine. But, here's probably what your life is going to look like,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, oh man, this were a lot of great questions, folks. So keep your questions coming. Head on over to phases.fm/questions, or just go to the website, leave a question. We'll have a link in the show notes, all that below. We want to hear from you, and don't be afraid. We read the questions out anonymously. We're not going to put any identifying information in there. We would just want to go ahead and like get the things that you all are actually dealing with in life, and we want to have a chance to put those in front of court. So thank you so much for listening. Court, anything else before we get out of here?
No, yeah. Thank you again for your questions. And I think it really helps inform what types of content you want to hear and what episodes we come up with. So we really appreciate them. Thank you.
Great. Well, we'll see you in the next one.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Phases. Make sure you subscribe and share with any parents in your life.
And if you have any questions for Dr. Courtney, head on over to phases.fm/questions and ask a question for the doctor.